over and over again when they were in trouble. When food was scarce, when they're afraid, they left wherever they were and they went back to Egypt. It starts at the very beginning with Abraham. Genesis 12, verse 10 says, "Now there was a famine in the land, and Abram went down to Egypt to live there for a while because the famine was severe." Does anyone remember what happened when Abraham went down to Egypt? He tried to pass his wife off as his sister, and things did not go well for Abram and Sarah in Egypt. But his great grandkids go back to Egypt in Genesis 42, starting at verse 1, in what I think is the most realistic family conversation in the Bible. When Jacob learned that there was grain in Egypt, he said to his sons, "Why do you just keep looking at each other?" He continued, "I've heard that there is grain in Egypt. Go down there and buy some for us so that we may live and not die." So Jacob's sons went to Egypt to buy grain and ended up running into their brother Joseph. Remember him? They'd sold him into slavery because he had a nicer jacket. And here he is running Egypt. So the entire family packs up and goes back to Egypt. Does that end well? No. 400 years of slavery for the family. So then we get to Exodus, the story of how God brought them out of that enslavement, and they left Egypt behind. They go out into the desert, saved by God for better things. And what do? Well, in today's first reading, they start grumbling that they should have just stayed in Egypt. They say, "What? Did they run out of graves in Egypt that we had to come out here and die?" You've heard people grumble like that, right? Creatively. And in today's reading from Numbers, they're at the end of the Exodus. They're almost over into the promised land, and they're still grumbling the same grumble. "We should just elect a new leader, go back to Egypt," because great things always happen to us when we go back to Egypt. No, great things never happen to them when they go back to Egypt. And it doesn't stop there. The prophet Jeremiah has to tell the people that God has forbidden them from going back to Egypt. Why did that come up? Because that was their idea. The Israelites and Judeans are like, it's tough, maybe Egypt? Like, times are hard. There's this whole long-term coping mechanism of the Israelites and Judeans. When things are too scary, there's always someone who mentions how good the food is in Egypt. What's the worst that could happen? A lot of bad things happened to them in Egypt. So we're all sitting here, we're judging them for their poor coping mechanism. But let me just say, we are not much different. Last year, the district superintendent, that's my boss, she read all of our evaluation paperwork and she called me and said, "So how is it really going in Marshfield?" And I told her it's going well, but that occasionally someone mentions that it might be nice to just go visit Egypt, right? Just go back to Egypt in this one thing. And that's preacher to preacher talk. That's how we say that people in our church feel nostalgic for the way things were before they had to change. And we laugh together because that is what God's people do. In the Bible and in churches, when we sense an unknown future in front of us, which is always, we know God is leading us into new situations and circumstances, that God is working all things out for our good. But it is hard because we don't know what that looks like. We don't know what's going to be asked of us or how we're going to have to put ourselves out there or what else has to change. And we start thinking that at least we knew the food was good. back where we were before it became clear God was leading us somewhere new. Who knows about the food? I received my first call to ministry when I was 19 years old, and I was not sure about that, but I was excited because finally I had an answer to the question of what I was going to be when I grew up. And I threw myself into the process, which is 7 to 10 years long. Now, a few weeks ago, I mentioned my academic advisor in political science, Paul, who taught me to think, and he was not gung-ho about this plan of me going into professional ministry. He wasn't the biggest fan of organized religion, and he had an alternate vision of my future, and in it, I was a professor, just like him. He wanted me to stay in academia. Now, I worked for him, grading papers and such, and he gave me, at the end of my junior year, the most horrible gift I could imagine. He assigned me to spend an entire semester researching the status of women pastors in the United Methodist Church. And then I had to present that research at a symposium. And I tried to give the gift back to him. No, thanks. I'll just keep grading papers. And he said, you have to do this. He insisted. And he said, I think you should know what you're getting into. I think that's fair. So 5 hours a week that semester, I researched women pastors in the UMC over the 40 years that women had had full clergy rights at that point. I read their memoirs. I read anything I could find on women pastors. I scheduled interviews, and I reached out to the UMC denominational offices. I needed data from them. Actually, I had the data because if there is one thing United Methodists have, it is a lot of publicly available data. It's almost creepy how much data is out there. But there is no gender markers in it. So when you look at the data, you ask, is Reverend Kay Polchow Kim or Kevin? There's no way to tell. So I needed a key that would unlock the data for my research, and I knew the Methodist Church had it. They knew whether their pastors were men or women, but I couldn't get any response to the emails I sent. So I called. I called Nashville, I called Evanston, I called these offices, and as soon as they heard what I wanted, they got off the phone. They didn't hang up on me, but it was close. And they were certainly not willing to give me this really easy key I needed for the data. So I told Paul how much trouble I was having just getting this easy piece of data from the UMC, and he said, oh, this was one of the things I was hoping you'd see. You need to see this before you give your professional life to an organization that says they value transparency and then closes the curtains in front of you every time you call them. So my last scheduled interview of the research was with a district superintendent. I had never met one before. They're just pastors. She was very nice. After a few questions, she asked me how my research project was going because she knew the denomination wasn't telling me anything. And I asked, how do you know this? Is this just how they are? And she told me that I had accidentally stepped on a very big landmine. And I didn't know I was on a landmine. So the UMC was about to release a 20-year study on the status of female pastors in the denomination. The UMC had done all the research I was doing. They were about to send it out, and it was not good news. It was really bad news, and everybody knew it, and every religion news reporter in the world was trying to get the scoop on that report and be the first one to report how bad it was. And the only reason she had met with me was because my pastor had vouched for me that I really was a college student with a call to ministry doing a research project because she thought exactly what all the denominational officials thought, that I was a reporter, disguising myself as a student doing a research project. And so my wickedly smart academic advisor had inadvertently set me up to call my own denomination with the one question they were not going to answer at that moment. So the DS asked me, preacher to future preacher, how I felt about a call to ministry now that I'd done this research, and I told her she could have it because I didn't want it anymore. And she said, let me give you a gift. And she reached into her desk and she pulled out a thick file that contained every communication she had ever received about that denominational report that was going to come out, including her instructions on how to answer questions from the press. And she gave it to me as a gift. All the originals. I didn't even know how to cite these documents in my research because they were internal UMC private documents. I didn't have the key to the data, but I had everything that had been released behind the curtains that had been drawn in my face. So I finished the research without the data I needed, and that became part of the report. And I gave the presentation, and you've never seen someone so sad to give their research report. And then I read the report that finally released from the UMC, and I withdrew my candidacy for ministry in the United Methodist Church. I still love God. But now, thanks to the research Paul had me do, I knew what I'd be getting into, and I wasn't going to get into it. So what's a girl to do when she finally found out what she was going to do for her life's work and sidestepped it? I went back to Egypt. I mean, you know, I didn't go to Egypt. I went to China, right? But metaphorically, I went back to Egypt. I went where I knew at least the food would be good, where I could go back to engaging my head and quit worrying about my heart, back to academic study. I interviewed in my senior year for a PhD program, and they wanted me to come back with passable Mandarin. Okay, check. Back to academia, back to Egypt, back to learning, back to before I cared if God had any idea to lead me somewhere new. And I carried with me that very early Old Testament idea that our God is a local God and that God would leave me alone 7,000 miles away. But God didn't leave me alone, because when God called me, something had changed in me. As soon as I accepted that call, I began to see people's suffering, and I became unable to ignore it. So I was always stopping people and asking them if they were okay. I've never seen as much suffering as I saw in my year in China. I would say I've not seen in my entire life as much suffering as I saw during that 1 year in China. And I've told you before, I never wanted to go farther than the local village where I was learning to talk Chinese real good from the villagers. So I speak the Webster County equivalent of Mandarin. The village was okay, but if I went into the city, I saw horrible things. I saw terrible injuries and people in pain, people who lived without any hope at all, people in dire need just being ignored. And I didn't want to see that. I was there just to use my brain. Back to Egypt, back to what I know, back to where I'm comfortable and the food's good. But God, like the exiles learned, is the God of the universe. And I could not get out of God's sight. And God wouldn't take away my new sight. So I saw horrible suffering. And I made it worse. Now, some of you may find what I'm about to say funny. It's also the saddest thing I've ever shared. So, however we react to it is fine. Okay, we may laugh, we may cry. So, I was not in a city that had a lot of foreigners, and the vast majority of foreigners were men. So, when people saw me, they reacted strongly. And back then, I was really short. So you couldn't see me coming in a crowd and prepare yourself like you could all the other foreigners. You couldn't avoid me. I was just suddenly there in your face, and people would go, foreigner. And then imagine you're having a day so terrible that you are publicly suffering. You're suffering in public. You're among your own people. Everyone knows how to react to you suffering, which is mostly just ignoring you. And then I pop up out of nowhere with what they called my pink hair and my super fair ghost-like skin. And I touch you and ask you in the local village accent, "Are you okay? Do you need some help?" People screamed, like horror movie level screams. People asked if they were dead. They thought I was the representative of the afterlife, but I had turned that job down before I came over. And I would say to them, all twangy, "Don't worry, I'm not a ghost, I'm an American." And that did not make anything better for them. To have a foreigner see your pain and touch you and try to help you just added layers of shock and shame, and it made everything worse for them. And so I had to realize that God had a plan for me to help people who were suffering. God was trying to lead me somewhere new, and China was not it. That is not where that was going to be. God was still God, but China was Egypt. The new place I was going to be led was still there, and it's not where I was. And I was the one in the wrong place, because proverbial Egypt is not where good things happen to God's people. We can try to go back there, but that's not where God is leading us. That's where we're trying to escape. So I came home, and when the call came again, I called Paul and I said, "Hey, at least I know what I'm getting into." And I reinstated my candidacy and moved to Chicago for seminary, where I often stopped people on the street and said, "Hey, are you okay?" And nobody screamed or asked if they were dead. But sometimes they just needed somebody to listen. It's really natural, really human to want to look back on where we've been and feel like, "Oh, that was better. That was easier. That was, well, at least the food was good." But that's not where God is. That's where God was, because we were there. And God is always with us. God is here now and will be in the unknown future into which God is leading us individually and as a group. God is with us now, which is probably why it's called the present, because it's a gift of Emmanuel, God with us right now, whenever and wherever that is. And it's a great gift. It's the one gift we should carry with us into the unknown future God has in store for us. So let us not go back to Egypt. God is here now. Let's go forward wherever God leads us together. Amen.